So, Jonah, thank you so much for setting aside the time today. You are most recently you were most recently the development officer at Columbia University School of the Arts and Miller Theater. How long were you there?
I've been here for a little over 2 years.
Fantastic. And you yourself had a background in performing, right?
Yeah, I was a trained classical singer, and I sang professionally from about age 17 to almost 25 or 26. Had to have surgery on my vocal cords, and so then I switched to the administrative side, did booking work for a while, and then got into development, sort of just through freelance grant writing at first, and then more formally with some positions prior to Miller and Columbia.
What voice part were you?
Oh, I was lyric tenor. So a lot of Mozart, a lot of Handel, a lot of Rossini.
That's wonderful. Did you ever sing at the theater that you then worked at?
No, actually, I didn't. That would have been funny, though, although I have a lot of colleagues who did. So I was aware of the work that Miller Theater did, just from being in New York, of course, and then also from colleagues who sang here, particularly with the contemporary music series.
And Miller is, from what I understand, the sort of contemporary composition is one of the foci.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to think of it in three major pillars, there is early music, jazz, and contemporary.
Okay. And not that old, right?
No,
It's like the late 80s?
It started, we're going into, next season will be the 25th anniversary, but it's really been presenting a lot longer than when it was called Miller Theater. So it's been presenting music since really the 40s. I think there were some recordings on stage of Aaron Copland and some pretty major things when NBC Radio was working in collaboration. So I'd have to check the old history books, but it's been presenting music for a long time. It just was formally named Miller Theater in 1988.
Okay. So there's, from New York theater goers, there's a memory of it before the late 80s.
Oh, yeah. I've worked with some prospects and donors who knew it well before it was called Miller Theater, and some of them actually sometimes call it historical names by accident. So.
Sure. But, I mean, that's great, actually, for donors, that there's, like, a longer memory and relationship and everything like that.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And New York is a fairly competitive venue scene. Certainly, I mean, I'm sure even on the far upper side where you are. So when talking to donors, when talking to potential audience members, what sort of differentiates Miller from other venues, other music and performance locales?
Well, I can't speak on behalf of the executive director or, the institution as a whole, but certainly from an outside perspective of just knowing Miller well before I even came to work here and at the School of the Arts at Columbia, even though I think it's strong in presenting all three of those pillars that we talked about, it gets the most notoriety, I think, for the Composer Portrait Series, which highlights a contemporary composer and most of the time has them interviewed on stage at intermission, which is a model that's being copied by some other presenters in the city. I think it's also very, very good in all of the series on catching people on the rise up to their fame. So, for example, Kaya Saryaho was produced and presented here a couple years before Carnegie Hall decided to pick her up as their artist in residence. Another example would be New York Polyphony. We caught them right before they were signed on by major management and started touring the world. So I think there's that legacy also of from a curatorial perspective, picking people up on the cusp of a major career.
That's great as a sort of niche area also for a university of really being that first, or university relationship to really be that first sort of venue where people are able to have some exposure and to support people young in their careers, if not young in age.
Yeah, and
Sure.
there's a, since it's tied to such a great research university and place of learning, I think it only is fitting that the kind of work that's presented too is um, it can be highly intellectual, but not in the pejorative sense.
Sure, sure. And how, I was reading that you seat about 700 in the theater on any given night, and that's, what, like maybe 3 times the size of a movie theater?
Yeah,
or so?
it's about 688 when you take in all the seats, and it was initially built as a lecture hall, so
Okay.
yeah, so acoustically, I think it works very, very well for certain kinds of music and others that we've made it work. So it certainly wasn't built with the idea of being a concert hall, but we make it work in all the situations that we have to. And it's really great for dance, although we don't
Oh,
present a lot of it, but we have in the past. So.
great. And how did you get into, or rather, doing development work? Were you overseeing all aspects of development? Were you one amongst many? What sort of team were you on? What size development staff?
Specifically at Miller or just in general in life? How did I get into development?
Specifically at Miller.
Oh, at Miller. Well, I was hired as the development officer, and like a lot of campus presenting models, the development staff is shared between the University Arts Department and the theater. So Miller Theater is under the umbrella of the School of the Arts, even though it's, it has its own, programming and mission that is separate from, the university. But as far as the actual structure of it, the board is still part of the university, et cetera. So I was hired as the development officer to manage the annual fund for both the School of the Arts and for Miller Theater, and also to manage a portfolio of about 100 prospects who could make leadership annual fund gifts and potentially major gifts.
So it's a real blend.
Yes, very much so.
Of different factors. And how is it that you all started screening ticket buyers? How did that happen?
Well, one of your former colleagues, Brian Chapman, had been hired on by the university as a whole to to take a really hard look at the university's data system. Of course, and Miller Theater is part of that. So he also then spoke to sort of the department heads of the different units of Columbia to give us a brief introduction on how to look at the data, what it all means, how to analyze it. And when we spoke to Brian, he had offered, or he told us about other theaters that were using it in ways that we hadn't and hadn't thought to use it, which was one of them was ticket screening, and offered us 1 year of sort of free use just to see if we thought it would be useful and to see if we wanted to continue it. And so that's when we started sort of dabbling in it, and then it just took off from there. And
what sort of realistically, what frequency did that mean? Were you okay, take us back. So the first, you started doing it probably with a batch, there was a lump sum, but then somehow you were trying to sort of do it in real time or something like that.
Yeah, so the rhythm that we kind of fell into, I mean, it was hard, and we still talk about how to maximize it because, of course, Miller Theater, even though it's part of a big university, it has its own budget, and it can't exceed it. So we didn't want to just screen every name that was ever going to buy a ticket. So we fell into the rhythm of looking at the ticket data about a week before the performance. Knowing that there's a lot of single ticket buyers out there who want to get it maybe just 48 hours in advance. But we had to put the line somewhere so that we had time to do the screening and then also to map it back to any data that we had in-house and then make a plan for certain individuals. So a week is where we found the sweet spot. Any less than that, and it can feel rushed. Any more than that, and we started losing a lot of people, because not everybody likes to buy subscriptions. And, that model is, most people are buying single tickets.
Right. And so when you say matching it up to the university system, so you would like screen them through the wealth screening software and then see if any of the names came up in the university donor management system or something like that?
Yeah, and so one thing, the way it works is on any given concert, let's say there's 400 ticket buyers. We'll do the screen, and then, or I'll do the screening, and then I'll see who the top maybe 25 are as far as just raw capacity, not any or anything. Then I'll go and check into the university's data system, which you can imagine is really large and quite extensive, and try to find maybe of those 25, which 5 have linkage to the university and the theater, which is not always the case because a lot of these people are just interested in Miller Theater as a standalone institution, even though it's part of the university. Of course, the sweet spot is finding someone who has ties to both or has historically been, a consistent giver to Miller Theater. So then we find those 5, and we look at those, look at their stories, and then I'll reach out to them by email, maybe 48 hours before a show, just thanking them for either being a long-term subscriber or donor or first-time ticket buyer, whatever label is appropriate, and say that I'll look for them at intermission or before the concert. So it's aggressive, I think, but it's not rude. And certainly if they're philanthropists, which of course the people who tend to rise to the top are, they know exactly what's going on. So then I will get their seat numbers from the ticket office, and before the concert or at intermission, introduce myself.
And is it just a matter of introduction at that first point?
Yes.
Okay.
It's usually a hello. I wanted to thank you in person, for being part of the Miller family for so long. And that's it. And then that gives me an opportunity then to follow up at 48 hours later saying, how did you like the concert? Love to get your thoughts on it. Can we go to coffee? And then that's how it starts.
It always starts with coffee, right?
It starts with coffee, exactly. Lunch if they've got a really high capacity, but so that's how it begins. And there are some situations where it's absolutely not my role to engage with them. Maybe they need someone higher up, but certainly at the annual fund or leadership annual fund level, it's appropriate for me to scout it out. And I've been given a lot of freedom to try this out, and I got a lot of ideas from other colleagues. My job prior to Miller Theater and Columbia was at Opera America, which is a service organization for the majority of opera companies in North America. So I would have, 130 different models I could look at. So I remember reaching out to certain people who I thought had pretty unique ideas and seeing how we can integrate this system. Because, of course, the seat visit model is not very new, but I think using data like this is somewhat new.
Yeah. Did any of the initial introductions and coffees result in new good relationships, or did most of them sort of end at coffee?
No, they are mostly all really great relationships, and I actually made a list because I wanted to make sure I could think about some of them when I talk to you. One of them is now at the stage of they're working with their advisors on a major gift because we have an anniversary next year. So this is someone who's now been cultivated for about a year and a half or 2 years. They're considering, a $25,000 gift. Though I'm not sure exactly what they're going to do, but it'll be probably around that level. We have some others who came up very high, and after a little bit more research, we realized they were really great planned giving prospects. So they have planned giving proposals on their tables. We have some that we met who are just very gregarious in the hall, and so they've been put on committees. And others are just,
That's so smart.
Yeah, some of them were just a handshake in the hall, and they maybe bumped up their annual fund a little bit. So, I mean, there's really a range of where the relationships went. I can honestly say no one was freaked out or put off by me showing up.
That's great.
I think, of course, that is a major fear, and rightfully so, and everyone's audience is going to be a little bit different. But either I've just locked out or the people I've met have been very friendly and not minded that
or
I
you're
stalking before and during the concert.
Or you're wonderful. And
well,
they
you know what? I'll take that. You put that in the interview. Yep. You keep that part.
Before you figured out that, like, sending the email 48 hours before and finding their seat number and scouting them out at intermission was, like, the good rhythm, what were some of the things that didn't quite work that you tried in the first couple months?
First couple months, I tried actually for those people who had been longtime subscribers but maybe, and had high capacity but hadn't given a gift, I thought I could bring around like a board member or the executive director of the theater to really wow them with the personal service. And it didn't quite work because when you take someone at that level through the audience, they're going to be pulled aside by numerous people. Their attention's going to be fought for. And we don't have a patron lounge, which would be the very logical place to invite. Like if we had a patron lounge, I would probably not be so on the ground. I would probably have them come to the patron lounge instead at intermission and have a controlled situation. But since we don't, I tried to bring the senior leadership to the person, and it just didn't work because inevitably another board member or someone from the press or someone wanting something from her, another staff member would try to grab her attention, and so we wouldn't get through all the seat visits.
That's really interesting because in some ways it means that you actually then are just establishing the primary relationship because it made sense and there's not the need for that sort of like concierge high-level wow factor.
Yeah, you know, I could move with more alacrity through the hall because I'm not as well known. I mean, I think that really was part of it. And and honestly, and looking back on it too, I think that my level of staff is actually probably more appropriate because even though these people have high capacity, none of these people were major gift donors before because obviously if they were, they would have already gotten special attention. This is really used for acquisition purposes.
And how many people can you realistically get to in a performance?
I move pretty quickly, and I can do about 5, I think.
In one intermission, or is that between intermission and after before?
It's with before and intermission. Our seats are very, we're roomy for a New York theater. So that has been, I have room to kind of, wiggle through the aisle. However, when we're off-site, I generally just don't try because some of the venues we use we pick for acoustic reasons, but the seats are really so close together, or they're dark, or they're churches, and I can't see. So there's some real logistics you just sort of figure out while you're doing it. But when we're in our home hall, I can move pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I would think also with the churches or something like that, you could Google image someone and try to find a picture, but really picking them out of a pew line would be really hard compared to just having a specific seat number. Yeah,
well, one trick I use is, let's say it's, John Smith is the prospect, and he's bought 3 tickets, and I get to the group of seats, and there's 3 men sitting there. Of course, I don't know who the person is, so I usually just say, "Hi, John, I'm Jonah," and whoever looks at me is John. So that's how I can smoke them out of a group. Because yeah, exactly. I mean, I've done that before and had it backfire, where he gave the tickets away to a group of friends. And never wrote me back when I said I was going to be coming to visit. So that was embarrassing. But I just said, well, please tell John, I came by, as I said it would, and they thought it was funny. But that's how I usually pick it out. Because, of course, I've never seen any of these people before. Or, I mean, I don't know who these people are. So
right.
You have to figure out which one they are by just calling out their name. It usually works.
Yeah, and certainly, any images that you find publicly can be misleading. So having some way that you wait until they look up, that's brilliant.
Yeah, you know, or say like Mr. Johnson. It's very, I'm Jonah. I'm the guy who emailed you. So.
Right, right. Did you find by and large that when somebody had a given capacity through the well screening, and they were in the university system or not, that they were a decent sort of wealth prospect, or yeah.
Yeah, and you know, one thing that Brian really instilled in us is he talked a lot about GG&A. This is to GG&A's credit, is that you're conservative in your estimates, especially at the exact and near level of screening. Sometimes I'll dig into the possibles as well, but at the exact and near level, I've not had any misfires.
And you're really just doing an initial overall screening. You're not necessarily getting deep down profiles on the top 20.
Well, you know, obviously a place like Columbia is going to be sitting on a lot of data, and occasionally there'll be somebody who has had a dossier or something put together in the past that wasn't, you know, that wasn't explored. So that's great to go in with all that, but it's still, it can be as small as a 2-minute interaction. So I'm not going to really dig too deep. It's nice to know that about them. But I don't delve into it. The qualification doesn't really come until later.
Right, as you develop the relationship and everything.
Exactly.
And how long have you been doing the screening now of ticket buyers regularly?
About 2 years. Yeah. Almost right when I started. Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is fabulous. Thank you so much for sharing your time today. This was wonderful. And we wish you all sorts of success in your next adventures and
thank you.
Wonderful contributions to arts development.
You're welcome. And let me know if you need to do another session or what, however I can be of help.